Hello and welcome to Pre-Algebra Lesson 23. In this video, we're going to talk about the order of operations with integers. So the lesson objective for today would be to learn how to use the order of operations when integers are involved. Now, we previously talked about the order of operations when we wrapped up our section on the whole numbers. So now that we're wrapping up our section on the integers, we're going to revisit this topic and just do some examples with integers involved. So before I go through the order of operations, I just want to remind you, if you're using something like PEMDAS, so this is really popular in the United States. In other countries, you might hear BODMAS. It's basically telling you the same thing. You need to be really careful. A lot of people remember this as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and then subtraction. Remember, when you look at this, the M and the D, the multiplication and division, have the same priority level and they need to be worked left to right. I can't tell you how many times people memorize this and then they're looking at that and they're saying, okay, I need to multiply before I divide. They are on the same priority level. They are worked left to right. Then the other guy here is addition and subtraction. So same priority level. They're worked left to right. So if we go through this, we would say the first thing is to work inside of any grouping symbols. So that's why we have that P that stands for parentheses, but it's also for brackets or absolute value bars or anything that's a grouping symbol. The second thing would be to perform all exponent operations. So that's the E there. Now included in this would be something like a square root. So let's say you had something like the square root of 4. And we haven't talked about this yet in the course, and I'll explain as we get to an example, but actually we can convert this over to exponential form. So this is actually 4 to the 1/2 power. So if you have a square root involved or a cube root or something like that, you would actually do this on the same level. So I'll talk more about this as we get into a problem. Let's just erase it for now. So coming down here, you'll see the third and the fourth steps. This is where people get lost, right? So again, if I write out the PEMDAS, so PEMDAS like this right here is where everybody gets confused. So the M and the D. I have here multiply or divide working left to right. So if multiplication comes before division, working left to right, you do multiplication first. If division comes before multiplication, again, working left to right, you do division first. Same priority level. Don't let this ordering of the letters here trip you up. Then the same thing is going to go for the A and the S. So add or subtract, again, working left to right. Okay, with that being said, let's just jump in and look at some problems. So we want to evaluate each. All right, so let's take a look at the first problem. We have -3 times, then you have -2, and notice this -2 is wrapped, and this is being squared, and then plus you have -24, and then divided by 4. So what is the highest priority? Again, we start with parentheses. The only parentheses we have would be this guy right here, which is wrapping this -2, and this guy right here, which is wrapping the -24. So there's nothing to really do there with parentheses. Then we move on to exponent operations. So do we have anything with an exponent? Yeah, we have this -2 that's being squared. So I want to stop here and remind you of what we talked about in the last lesson. If you have -2 and it's wrapped, so it's inside of parentheses, and I square it, this is equal to -2 and then times -2, which is +4. Okay, you can do this on your calculator. Make sure you wrap it. So you would wrap it like this, -2. You would hit that key there, and then you would put your 2 in there, and then basically you would get a 4 as an answer. Now this is different versus if I did this. Let's say I wrote -2 like this. I did not wrap it, and then I squared it like this. Let's say you key that into your calculator. You're going to get an answer of -4. And you're probably going to be confused by that because you're saying, well, that's -2 squared. It's a notational issue. If I ask you for -2 being squared, you want to use this, okay? This is basically going to get translated into -1 times 2 squared. So in other words, the base here is actually 2, right? It's not -2 because this negative is outside of here. You could read this as the negative of 2 being squared. Okay, so this would end up being -1 times 2 squared would be 2 times 2 or 4. So this is -4. So if you key it into your calculator, you've got to make sure that you use the right notation so that you get the right answer. So let me get rid of this. And what we're going to do is put equals here. And I'm just going to replace this with a +4. So we have -3 and then times +4. And then plus you have -24 and then divided by 4. So I've taken care of my exponents. The next thing again is multiplication or division working left to right. So here I see that I have multiplication and I have division. Now working left to right, this multiplication occurs to the left of this division. So that means this guy right here is the higher priority. Let me unhighlight that. So that means I'm going to do -3 times 4. So a negative times a positive is a negative. So let me write that's a negative. And now I can just say, well, what is 3 times 4? That's 12. So this would be negative 12 here. Okay, then we have plus negative 24 and then divided by 4. So now I'm still on my multiplication and division step, and I have division here. So I'm going to divide negative 24 by 4. So negative 24 divided by 4 would be negative 6. Negative divided by positive is negative, and 24 divided by 4 is 6. So that's negative 6. So we would say this is negative 12, and then basically we would have plus negative 6, or you could write negative 12 minus 6, whatever you're more comfortable with. So the last thing here is just to do this addition. So negative 12 plus negative 6, you have a common sign. Both of these guys are negative, so the answer would be negative. And then you could just add the absolute values. So 12 plus 6 is 18. So this gives me a final answer of negative 18. All right, now before we move on to the next problem, I'm going to do this problem in a different way. I'm actually going to change it up. So you see we got negative 18 there. So what I'm going to do is actually write this problem as negative 3. And then instead of wrapping this, I'm just going to put times the negative of 2 being squared like this. Then plus, we're going to have negative 24. And then divided by 4. And I'm going to show you that you get a completely different answer. Now you're going to get positive 6. And the change is going to be because this guy right here is going to throw everything off because your sign is going to go from a positive 4 to a negative 4. So if you're keying this into your calculator and you're expecting to get the same answer as this, I'm going to show you where you're going to run into an issue. So let me copy this and let me paste this in. I'm just going to run through this really quickly. So we know the first thing we would do would be the exponent operations. But again, because this is the negative of 2 being squared, this becomes negative 1 times 2 squared in your calculator. 2 squared is done first because of the order of operations. So that's 4. So you get negative 1 times 4, which is negative 4. Okay, it's only positive 4 if this gets wrapped. So I'm going to replace this right here with a negative 4. So you'd have negative 3 times negative 4. Then plus negative 24 divided by 4. So now, just like we saw before, we're going to do this multiplication first, but now instead of a negative times a positive, we have a negative times a negative. So a negative times a negative is a positive, so negative 3 times negative 4 would be positive 12. Now, we have our plus negative 24, and then divided by 4. So now we would do our division. So negative 24 divided by 4, that's going to be negative 6. So this becomes 12, and then plus your negative 6, or you could go 12 minus 6 if you want. And obviously the answer there is 6. So you see the other way we did it, when we wrap this, we got a negative 18. And when we don't wrap this, we get a positive 6. So it's very important to understand this notational issue. It's going to come up for the rest of your time that you're studying math. All right, let's take a look at the next problem. So here, another easy one. We have negative 20 divided by negative 5, then minus 12 times 2 plus 3 squared. Now, the first thing we want to do is work inside of parentheses or any grouping symbols. So we do have parentheses here, but they're just used for clarity, right? They're just used to wrap that negative 5. So you can ignore that here and just move into working with the exponents. So here we have 3 squared, so we'd want to do that first. So this is the highest priority. Let me copy all of this. So negative 20 divided by, you can wrap this or not wrap it. I'm just going to wrap it for clarity. So divided by negative 5, then minus 12, and then times 2, and then plus. So 3 squared is 3 times 3. That's going to be 9. So we've taken care of the exponents. And now we want to move into the multiplication or division. So let me write this one more time because people do get lost here. And it's very important to understand that multiplication and division occur on the same level. Okay, they're work left to right. So if you're using PEMDAS, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or you're in a different country than me and you're using BODMAS, it's the same thing. You want to highlight these two and say that they are worked left to right. Okay? Might want to put that down in your notes or something like that. It's very important to remember that. Let me erase this, and we're going to think about this. I have division right here, and then I have multiplication right there. Which one am I going to do first? Again, they're the same priority level. So I want to work left to right. So starting on the left, this operation occurs before this one. Okay, so that means I'm going to do my division first. So I'm going to divide negative 20 by negative 5. So negative divided by negative is a positive, and then 20 divided by 5 would be 4. Okay, so that's done. Then we have minus 12 times 2 plus 9. Now, the next step, because we're still on the multiplication or division level, would be to multiply 12 times 2. Now, if you want, You can convert this over. You could say this is plus negative and do it that way, or you can keep it like this. It's going to give you the same answer in the end. It's really up to you. So I'm just going to keep it like this. So I'm going to say this equals 12 times 2 is 24. So we would have 4 minus 24 and then plus 9. So here we have subtraction and we have addition. Now, when you have integers involved where you're dealing with positive and negative numbers, I like to convert all of the subtraction into a related addition problem. I think it just makes it easier. So I'm just going to go plus negative like this. And then because of the commutative property of addition, you can add in any order. Okay, so I can just say this is 4 plus negative 24. Maybe I could wrap that to make it more clear. And then plus 9. So I can add however I want. Typically what you'll do is you'll add the numbers with the same sign first. So I would say 4 plus 9 would be 13. And let me reorder that so nobody's lost. Let me reorder this to 4 plus 9 plus negative 24. 4 plus 9 would be 13. And now we have plus a negative 24. So now we want to do 13 plus a negative 24. So hopefully you have mastered adding integers at this point. I know when you have a different sign involved, it can be a little bit tricky for some people. But basically you want to look at these two numbers and say which number is larger in terms of absolute value. The absolute value of 13 is 13. The absolute value of negative 24 is 24. So negative 24 has a larger absolute value, so we're using that sign. So the result will be negative. So now I can just think about these numbers as if they were positive numbers, and I could just do a subtraction. Subtract the bigger minus the smaller. So what is 24? Let me do this off to the side. What is 24 minus 13? I think a lot of you can do that in your head at this point and say it's 11, but just in case you can't, 4 minus 3 is 1, and then 2 minus 1 is 1. So this is going to be 11. So this would be negative 11 for the answer. All right, let's take a look at the next problem. So this is a little bit more challenging, but still not that bad overall. So we have some brackets here, and inside the brackets, we have a set of parentheses, so negative 4 being squared, plus 52, that's inside the first set. Then plus inside the second set, you have negative 93 divided by 31, then plus 55. Then outside the brackets, we have divided by a set of parentheses here, which is 2 cubed minus 28 inside. All right. The first thing I want to do is work inside of any parentheses or grouping symbols. Well, you have brackets here, and then you have parentheses here. So what I'm going to do is actually start off inside the brackets. And when I do that, I want to reapply the order of operations. So in other words, I want to look for parentheses again, and let me change my highlighter color here. You see that you have that here, and then you have that here, okay? So you want to make sure that you do what's inside the parentheses here, and then what's inside of the parentheses here separately, and then you can add. So it doesn't really matter if you do this one first or this one first. I'm just going to work on the one that's here on the left first. Let me put a little border here, and I'm going to say I have a negative 4 being squared plus 52. So let's do that first. Now, like we previously talked about, if you're keying this into the calculator, make sure that you wrap negative 4 before you square it. Otherwise, you're going to get the wrong answer. Because if you have negative 4 being squared, this is what? This is negative 4 times negative 4, which is positive 16. If you have the negative of 4 squared, again, the negative is not wrapped. So this is really negative 1 times 4 squared, which gives you negative 16. Two different results in your calculator. So if you don't make sure that you're wrapping this, you're going to get the wrong answer. So very important. So when we look at this, we see that we have an exponent operation and we have addition. So we would do the exponent operation first. It has the higher priority. We just said that negative 4 squared was 16, and then we would add that to 52. Now, I can pretty much do that in my head. I know that's 68, but just in case you can't and you're not using a calculator, again, you can always stop and do a vertical addition. So 52 plus 16, 2 plus 6 is 8, 5 plus 1 is 6. So that's how we get the 68. Okay, so let's erase everything. And how much work you want to show is up to you. I'm just going to show all the steps so nobody's lost. I'm going to put the brackets here. The result of this is 68. Then plus, I'm just going to copy this. So you have negative 93 divided by 31 plus 55. So that's inside the parentheses. Close down the brackets, and then we're dividing by. So inside these parentheses, you have 2 cubed minus 28. Okay, close that down. Let me slide down here a little bit. All right, now the next thing is we're still working inside the brackets. So now let's go into these parentheses here. And so basically you have negative 93 divided by 31 and then plus 55. So we would obviously divide before we add. Division has a higher priority level. Negative divided by positive is negative. when we think about 93 divided by 31, that one's a little bit tricky because essentially you can't really benefit from doing the long division. You really have to say, well, what is 93 divided by 31, right? Because 31 goes into 9 0 times. So you have to expand this and say, well, 31 goes into 93, so I'm back to the original division problem. If you use multiplication, you would find that it's 3. 31 times 1 is 31, 31 times 2 is 62, and then 31 times 3 would be 93. So you basically have to use multiplication there. So 3 times 31, as I just said, is 93. Subtract here, you get 0, so there's no remainder. So this would end up being negative 3, right? So negative 93 divided by 31 is negative 3. Okay, let's get rid of this, and now we're going to add 55. Now, this one, again, it's a little bit tricky because you're adding integers with different signs. What I like to do is flip the order here and say this is 55 plus a negative 3. And then notice, if I had been given 55 minus 3, I can legally go to that. We can always convert our subtraction into a related addition. So change the subtraction into addition, change the number being subtracted away into its opposite. Okay, so this ends up just becoming 55 minus 3, which is going to be 52. So let's get rid of this, and let's say this equals, inside of brackets, 68 plus 52, and we'll close that down, and it's divided by, again, in the parentheses, we have 2 cubed minus 28. Okay, let's wrap things up by doing this addition here. I think it's probably something, again, you could do in your head, but there is some carrying there, so maybe you want to write it out. So 68 plus 52, 8 plus 2 is going to be 10. Put a 0 down, carry the 1. 1 plus 6 is 7, plus 5 is 12. So this would be 120. And say this equals 120, so we're done with that, divided by, again, inside the parentheses, 2 cubed minus 28. So now I want to work inside of these parentheses here, and I want to do 2 cubed first. Let me make that a little bit more clear. I want to do that first because that has a higher priority than the subtraction. So 2 cubed is 2 times 2 times 2, which is going to be 8. So let's say this is 120 divided by, you would have 8 minus 28. So now I want to do the subtraction. Again, what I like to do is go plus negative here and think about it that way. So if I have a negative 28 plus 8, then I'm using the sign of the number. Let me write 120 here. I'm using the sign of the number with a larger absolute value. So negative 28 has a larger absolute value, so I'm going to put a negative there. And then I'm just going to do a subtraction. So basically the larger absolute value minus the smaller. So basically you would say that 28 minus 8 would be 20. So this is divided by negative 20. Okay, so from here, it's actually pretty easy. We know positive divided by negative is a negative. And then you can think about 120 divided by 20. So again, we have another one where the long division doesn't really help you that much because 20 doesn't go into 1 or 12. So you have to go all the way into what is 20 into 120, which is basically going to give us 6, right? You have to use a related multiplication statement to figure that out. So 6 times 20 is 120. Subtracting, you get 0. So this becomes negative 6 as our final answer. All right, let's take a look at the next example. So this one's a little bit more tedious, a little bit more time-consuming is what I would really say. So we have the square root of 64 times negative 9. Let me wrap this here so it's more clear. Then you have minus a negative 3, then plus. Remember, these vertical bars tell you that you want the absolute value of something, and those are grouping symbols. So we have the negative of 2 squared. So notice this negative here is not wrapped inside of parentheses. Then times negative 15, and then plus 4, and then divided by 2. I'm going to wrap this also for clarity. And then down here we have minus, and then we have these parentheses here. So you have negative 2. Notice this one's wrapped, being squared, plus negative 8 divided by 2, and this is squared. The first thing I would do is think about what parentheses or grouping symbols do I have. When you have parentheses that are just used like these, just to wrap a number, don't worry about them. Okay, so you're just looking for grouping symbols like the absolute value bars there, or these parentheses here. Okay, so you have some operations inside. So where I want to start, let me get rid of this highlighting here so nobody's confused. Where I want to start, I'm just going to start inside of the absolute value bars. If you wanted to do this guy inside of here first, it's really up to you. I'm just going to start there. So I'm just going to copy this down here. So we have the absolute value of, again, be very careful. This is the negative of 2 squared times, I'm going to wrap this, so negative 15, then plus 4, and then divided by 2. We'll come back up in a moment. I'm going to need a lot of room for this. Let me come down here. And let me put equals here. So the first thing is you would think about what's my highest priority? Well, inside of here, do I have any parentheses? Well, I have these parentheses, but they're just used to wrap a number. So really I don't. I could just move on to exponents. And here I have this exponent operation. But again, if you're keying this into your calculator, This right here is going to give you negative 4. This right here is going to give you positive 4. Again, this is the negative of 2 squared, so your calculator is doing negative 1 times 2 squared, which is giving it negative 4. This one, it would do negative 2 times negative 2, which would give it positive 4. So I've got to make sure that I use the right one if I want the right answer. So this right here would give me a negative 4, not a positive 4 because it's not wrapped. Then times. Here you have this negative 15, and then plus 4, and then divided by 2. Let me close that down. And now I'm thinking about, okay, I have multiplication, addition, and division. Multiplication and division are on the same priority level. They are worked left to right. So this one is to the left of this one. So I'm going to multiply first. So negative 4 times negative 15, negative times negative is positive, 4 times 15 is 60. So this right here, I'll put the absolute value of 60, then plus 4, and then divided by 2. So now I have addition and division. You want to divide first. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. So we'll say this is the absolute value of 60 plus 2. And then from here, 60 plus 2 is 62. So this would be the absolute value of 62. We can go ahead and do that operation now. The absolute value of a positive number is just the number. So the absolute value of 62 is 62. And I'm just going to come back up here and put equals. I'm going to copy this. So the square root of 64, then times negative 9, then minus a negative 3. And the result of this was 62. So now I'm just going to put plus 62. And I'm just going to keep working. Then I have minus. This guy right here is not going to fit on this line. So let me slide down just a little bit. And I'm going to write inside of parentheses, you have this negative 2 being squared. Notice that this is wrapped. Okay, that's very important. Then plus negative 8 and then divided by 2. And then this guy is squared. Okay, let's put equals here. In terms of what to do next, you have these parentheses here that you need to work inside. So I'm going to think about, let me just write this down here. I'll just put a little border. And I'll say that we have this negative 2. Again, this is wrapped, being squared. Plus you have negative 8, and then divided by 2. And then we're going to square this. I'm just working on this part right now. So thinking about my order of operations inside, I have parentheses, but they're just used to wrap this number and this number. So I move on to exponent operations. So I have that here, right? So negative 2 being squared. So again, negative 2 being squared, because this is wrapped, you're going to get 4. If you don't wrap it, if you key it in your calculator like this, you're going to get negative 4. So again, we have to make sure that we're paying attention to which form we're using. So this right here would be a positive 4, and then plus a negative 8, and then divided by 2, and this whole thing is squared. All right, so now I have addition and division. I want to divide first. So negative 8 divided by 2 would be negative 4. This would end up giving me 4 plus a negative 4. Of course, you could write that as 4 minus 4 if you wanted to, and this would be squared. So 4 plus a negative 4, those guys are opposites or additive inverses, or however you want to think about that. The sum is going to be 0. So we'll say this is 0 squared. Let me get rid of all this, and let me come back up and get rid of this border. I'm just going to copy things again. So I have the square root of 64 times this negative 9, then minus this negative 3, then plus 62, and then minus, this is going to be 0 squared. Okay, so I've dealt with all the parentheses and the grouping symbols. So now I want to move on to exponents. Now, this right here is worked on the same priority level as an exponent, because the square root of 64, as we're going to learn later on, is the same thing as 64 to the 1/2 power. We won't talk about that for now. We'll talk about it much later on, but you just need to know that if you're seeing some type of square root or cube root or something like that in an order of operations problem, it's going to be with the exponents in terms of the priority level. Okay, let me get rid of this. And first, let's do the one we know. We know that 0 squared would be 0. So let me write the square root of 64 times negative 9 minus a negative 3, then plus 62. And you can write minus 0 if you want, or you can leave it off. Of course, if we subtract away 0, it's not going to do anything. So let's just leave it off. Okay, let me slide down here. And now let's think about the square root of 64. So at this point, we have not talked about square roots. And basically, all you need to think about is this. If I have the square root of some number, let's just say 4, then basically what I'm asking for is what number, when multiplied by itself, will give me this number under the square root symbol, which is called the radicand. In this case, for 4, you would immediately think about 2, right? 2 times 2 is 4. So the square root of 4 is 2. Now, some of you are going to say, well, hey, negative 2 times negative 2 is also 4. So we have a different notation for that. You have the negative of the square root of 4, which would be negative 2. So if I ask what positive number, when multiplied by itself, gives me 4, I want this notation here. So this is the principal, or some people say the positive square root of 4, that is positive 2. Then this one, I'm asking for what negative number, when multiplied by itself, gives me the radicand, right? So this is the negative of the square root of 4, and that's going to be negative 2, because negative 2 times negative 2 would be 4. Okay, so we understand that general concept. And so with that being said, we would say, well, what is the square root of 64? Well, what number, when you multiply it by itself, would give you 64? Now, you could factor the number, which we haven't talked about yet. Basically, right now, I think most of you know that that would be 8, because 8 times 8 is 64. Again, if you had the negative of the square root of 64, that's where you would get negative 8. Okay, we're asked for the principal square root of 64, which is positive 8. So that's the difference between the two. So let me get rid of this. Let me put equals. Let me put 8 times negative 9, and then minus a negative 3, and then plus 62. So I don't have any exponents anymore. I just have multiplication, subtraction, and addition. So I want to multiply before I do any subtraction or addition. So this is positive times negative, which is negative, and then 8 times 9 is 72. So this is negative 72. Now you have minus a negative 3, and then plus 62. So we have talked about the fact that minus a negative is plus a positive. So I know this is one that trips up a lot of students, but when you see minus a negative, it is plus a positive. So I'm going to rewrite this as negative 72 plus 3 plus 62. Again, minus a negative plus a positive. So then if you want to, since this is all addition now, you can reorder it. I'm just going to say this is 3 plus 62 and then plus negative 72. Again, that's my commutative property to where I can add in any order. Let me actually grab this. Let me paste this in here so we have some room. So now I'm just going to add 3 and 62 together. 3 plus 62 is 65. So you get 65 plus a negative 72. So at this point, you basically have to think about, okay, I'm adding these integers with different signs. Which number has the larger absolute value? The absolute value of 65 is 65. The absolute value of negative 72 is 72. So negative 72 has a larger absolute value, so we're going to use that sign in the answer. So this would be negative. Once you're done with that, just work with the numbers as if they were positive, and you're just going to do a subtraction of the larger minus the smaller. So I'm going to go 72 minus 65. Borrow here, this is a 6, this is a 12. 12 minus 5 is 7. 6 minus 6 is 0. So I'm just basically going to drag that 7 up here and say that negative 7 is my final answer. Now, if you didn't get negative 7, go back and just be very careful and check your work, okay? If you're using an online calculator to check or something like that, just make sure you're wrapping things correctly. A lot of times, the smallest error will give you a big change in the result, okay? So the answer you're looking for here is negative 7. All right, let's take a look at a tedious problem. So for this one, before we get started, I need to explain something about fractions. So at this point in the course, we have not talked about fractions, but we're going to get to that topic very shortly. If I had something like, let's say 20 divided by 5, I could actually write this division problem using a fraction. So I can take my dividend, or the starting amount, and put that up here in the top part of the fraction, which is called the numerator. And then I'm going to have my fraction bar. And then this divisor here, this 5, I'm going to put that in the bottom part of the fraction. This is called the denominator. So I can say this is 20 divided by 5, or 20 over 5, or 20/5. There's a lot of different ways you could say that. But either way, this is going to be a result of 4. And we'll cover this in more detail later on in the course. I just want you to understand that you can write a division using a fraction bar. So when you come across an order of operations problem with a fraction like this involved, you want to simplify the numerator and denominator separately, and then you will perform the main division. So at the end, I would perform the final value in the numerator divided by the final value in the denominator, just like we did 20 over 5 like that, and we got 4. So we're going to do something similar here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start off with my numerator and just simplify that. So I'm just going to copy it. So negative 2 to the 5th power divided by 4, and then times, we have this negative 3, and then plus, so we have these parentheses like this. I'm just going to use a different color for clarity. And then we have this negative 3 being cubed, and then plus the absolute value of 4 minus 4 squared. Let me close that down, and let me change back to this color and close that down. Okay, I'm going to grab this. All right, let's paste this in. We're going to go real slow, just step by step. So the first thing is we're thinking about, do I have any parentheses or grouping symbols? Don't worry about the parentheses that are used to just wrap a number. So this and this, you can ignore that for now. You're just thinking about, do I have any parentheses with some operations inside that I need to do? Well, yeah, I have these parentheses here. So I want to start inside of there. But once I get inside, I need to reapply the order of operations. So I need to think about inside of here, are there any parentheses or grouping symbols? And the answer to that is yes. So if I come in here, I see that I have the absolute value bars there. And so those are grouping symbols. So I would want to start with this right here. So what is the absolute value of 4 minus 4 squared? Well, inside of there, you would think about, okay, I have subtraction and then I have an exponent. So I want to do the exponent first. So 4 squared is 4 times 4, that's 16. So this is the absolute value of 4 minus 16. So a lot of you can do that in your head at this point. So 4 minus 16 is negative 12. If you can't, you can rewrite this as 4 plus a negative 16. Okay, so that is what you can do if you're struggling with things like that. You can always change it into a related addition statement, and then you can just use your rules for adding integers with different signs. So what I would say is the absolute value of what? The absolute value of 4 is 4, and the absolute value of negative 16 is 16. So the larger absolute value comes from this guy right here, the negative 16. So you use that sign in the answer. So I know this is going to be negative. Then you would do a subtraction, the larger absolute value minus the smaller. So 16 minus 4 would be 12. So this is negative 12. And we want the absolute value of that, which is going to be positive 12. So let me get rid of all of this, just scratch work. And I think because this is going to take such a long time, that maybe I could just erase things. I'm just going to erase this. And hopefully you've copied that down. And I'm just going to put a positive 12 there. So we'll just erase things as we go. So now I'm still inside of these parentheses here. And now I have an exponent operation and I have addition. So the exponent comes first. You have negative 3 that is being cubed here. So this is negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. So it doesn't really matter that this is wrapped here. You have an odd exponent, so you have an odd number of negative factors. That's going to give you a negative, right? Negative times negative times negative will give you a negative. And then 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So this is negative 27. Okay, let me get rid of this and put in a negative 27 there. Okay, let me get rid of this. Now, again, we're adding two integers with different signs. So you want to use the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. The absolute value of negative 27 is 27. The absolute value of 12 is 12. So negative 27 has a larger absolute value. So if I'm doing negative 27 plus 12, I know the answer is negative. And then I just do a subtraction. Larger absolute value minus the smaller. Let me put this off to the side. So you're going to go 27 minus 12. 7 minus 2 is 5. 2 minus 1 is 1. So I would drag this over here, and then basically you would have negative 15 as the answer. So let me erase this, and this is now negative 15. Okay. Let me get rid of this. Now, these parentheses, you could keep them if you want. They're wrapping the negative. You could drop them. It's really up to you. It's just personal preference. All right, so now that we've gotten rid of all the grouping symbols, we need to think about the exponent operations, and we have negative 2 to the 5th power. So negative 2 to the 5th power. Now, this is an odd exponent, so it really doesn't matter. If you typed negative 2 like this to the 5th power into your calculator, you're going to get negative 32. And if you wrap it, you're going to get negative 32. And that's because you have an odd exponent. So with an odd exponent, then basically you're going to have an odd number of negative factors, which gives you a negative result. Here, this is basically always going to be negative. It's the negative of 2 to the 5th power. So your calculator treats this as negative 1 times 2 to the 5th power, which is negative 32. With this one, it's saying, well, what is negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 and then times negative 2? Well, that's going to be negative 32. So just two different ways to think about things. The answer is the same either way, but how you go about getting it is different. All right, let me get rid of this, and I'm going to replace this with a negative 32. So negative 32. And so now we have division, multiplication, and addition. And this really looks like an X. I'm trying to make this a little bit more clear there that that's a multiplication symbol. So you have this division here that's going to occur to the left of the multiplication. And again, this is where everyone gets tripped up. Because of the ordering of the letters in PEMDAS, everyone thinks that multiplication comes before division. They have the same priority level. They are worked left to right. So because the division occurs to the left of the multiplication, you want to divide first. So you want to say, what is negative 32 divided by 4? Negative divided by positive is negative. 32 divided by 4 is 8. So this is negative 8. So I'm just going to erase this and put in a negative 8 there. Okay, so now we have multiplication and addition. So we have negative 8 times negative 3 that would be done first. Multiplication is the higher priority. Negative times negative is positive. 8 times 3 is 24. So this will just be 24. And for the last guy here, we're basically adding these integers with different signs. So again, use the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. The absolute value of 24 is 24. The absolute value of negative 15 is 15. So we're going to use a positive here because this guy has a larger absolute value. So I know this is a positive. So then I would just subtract. What is 24 minus 15? A lot of you can do that in your head. You know it's going to be 9. But again, you can always do it off to the side. What is 24 minus 15? You'd borrow here. This is going to be a 1. This is 14. 14 minus 5, that's going to give you 9. Okay, let me get rid of this, and you don't need that plus symbol there. So basically, I'm going to come back up, and the result of the numerator is going to be 9. Then this is over. I'm just going to copy the denominator. So we have this negative of 4 squared minus the square root of 9. And then plus, you have the absolute value of 2 times this negative 3. And then plus 18 divided by 3 minus 15. Let me close down the absolute value bars there. Then plus, you have this negative 1 being squared. Okay, I'm going to grab this, paste that in there. All right, so a lot to do here. You have these grouping symbols here, so for parentheses, and then you also have the absolute value bars there. So I'm just going to start with this one, and then we'll simplify this completely, and then we'll work on this one, and then we'll see what else we have. So inside the parentheses, you have the negative of 4 squared minus the square root of 9. So what is done first? Well, in this particular case, you have an exponent operation, and then you have a square root here. I told you those are the same priority level. So it really doesn't matter if I do this one first or this one first. I'm going to basically do each one of these operations before I do this subtraction. So if I think about, again, the negative of 4 squared, you have to be careful there. Your computer or your calculator, whatever you're using, is saying this is negative 1 times 4 squared. So this is negative 16. Again, if you want positive 16, you have to wrap that. So you would have to do negative 4 wrapped in parentheses being squared, and that's going to give you 16. And I know I keep going over this again and again and again, and that's just because it comes up all the time as a common mistake. So let me get rid of this, and let me replace this with negative 16 here. And then the square root of 9, again, we are asking for what positive number, when multiplied by itself, gives you 9. Well, that's going to be 3, right? So I'm going to say that the square root of 9, or at least the principal square root of 9, is going to be 3. So now I have negative 16 minus 3. And so you can go plus negative here to make that a little bit cleaner. And let me wrap that. So we have the same sign here. So I'm just going to put a negative there and then just add the absolute values. So 16 plus 3 would be 19. So this is going to be negative 19 as the answer. Okay, let me get rid of this. And actually, I'm just going to erase things as I go. And I'll just say that this is negative 19. All right, so now I'm going to mess with this guy right here. So inside the absolute value bars, you will notice that you have what? You have multiplication, you have addition, you have division, and subtraction. So the multiplication occurs to the left of the division. So that means it has a higher priority. So I'm going to go 2 times negative 3 first. A negative times a positive or a positive times a negative will give you a negative. And then 2 times 3 is 6. So let's get rid of this and just put negative 6 there. Then I have addition, division, and subtraction. So you want to divide first. 18 divided by 3 is 6. So let's put a 6 there. And so now I have addition and then subtraction. So the addition and the subtraction have the same priority level. We're just going to work them left to right. So here we're seeing that the addition occurs to the left of the subtraction. You want to add before you subtract. So you have negative 6 plus 6. So I'm adding a number and its opposite or a number and its additive inverse. That's always going to give me 0. So this right here is 0. So you could write 0 if you want, or you could leave it off. It really doesn't matter. 0 minus 15 is still negative 15. So I'm just going to put negative 15 there. And if I take the absolute value, let me close this down so this is a little bit more clean. If I take the absolute value of negative 15, that's going to give me positive 15. Okay, the last thing here, let me move this down. The last thing here when we're looking through everything, we have an addition, we have another addition, and then we have an exponent operation. So I want to perform the exponent operation first. So you have a negative 1. Again, this is wrapped and it's squared. So this is negative 1 times negative 1, which is 1. And again, I'll show this one more time. If you had written the negative of 1 squared, this becomes, in your calculator, negative 1 times 1 squared, which becomes negative 1, right? So negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Let me get rid of this. And of course, that form there, because it was wrapped, that's positive 1. Okay, so now we could just go through and add. Again, I like to add the numbers with like signs first. That's possible because of the commutative property. We can add in any order. So I could say that this is 15 plus 1 plus a negative 19 like this. So 15 plus 1 is 16. And then you have 16 plus a negative 19. Now, a lot of you can eyeball this and see that it's negative 3. But again, you can always go through the official procedure. So I would use the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. The absolute value of 16 is 16. The absolute value of negative 19 is 19. And so negative 19 has a larger absolute value. So we're using its sign. So the result is negative. And then you just subtract the larger absolute value minus the smaller. So 19 minus 16 is 3. So this is going to be negative 3 as the answer. So let's go back up and let's put a negative 3 there. So at this point, again, you can convert this over. Remember, we said that 20 divided by 5 could be written as 20 over 5, which was 4. Well, if I have 9 over negative 3, I can convert that over, if it's easier for you, to 9 divided by negative 3. So either way, I'm just going to keep it like this as a fraction. But if you need to do that for right now because you're not used to working with fractions, that's fine. Basically, 9 divided by negative 3, a positive divided by a negative, or a positive over a negative, that's going to be a negative. And then 9 divided by 3 is 3. So the final answer here is going to be negative 3. Now, this problem has so many different operations that if you didn't get negative 3, you really have to go back. A lot of times, problems like this, you just rip the paper up because there's just so many places you can go wrong. But you really want to go back and just check every step. And you can follow along with the video to see, well, what answer did I get for each step? And then, as I said before, the smallest mistake on a problem like this can give you a really, really different answer. Okay, so you're looking for negative 3 as the final answer.